The scream echoed across the canyon before it was swallowed by the rushing water below, and Nathan Thornhill knew someone was about to die if he didn't move fast. He had been tracking a mountain lion for the better part of 2 days through the New Mexico Territory wilderness, following signs through rocky terrain that most men wouldn't dare traverse, even in good weather. The September sun beat down mercilessly on his broad shoulders as he urged his horse forward through the pine-covered slopes above the river gorge. His long, dark hair, tied back with a strip of leather, kept the worst of it off his neck, but sweat still traced paths down his sun-bronzed skin. At 28, Nathan had spent the last decade living in these mountains, his body honed by the demanding life into solid muscle and endurance that would put most town-dwelling men to shame. The scream came again, higher pitched this time, definitely a woman, and Nathan kicked his horse into a faster pace through the trees. He burst through a stand of aspen onto an old mining trail and saw the bridge ahead, or what was left of it. The rope and timber construction that had once spanned the 40-foot gorge had collapsed on one side, leaving the wooden planks dangling at a dangerous angle over the churning white water below. And there, clinging to the rope railing on the still intact section, was a woman in a traveling dress, her wagon on the far side with a broken wheel. Nathan dismounted in one fluid motion, his muscular frame moving with surprising grace for his size. He approached carefully, assessing the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had survived alone in wilderness that killed softer men. The bridge supports on the near side were rotted through, probably undermined by spring flooding. The woman was about 15 feet out, frozen in terror as the structure swayed with every gust of wind that funneled through the canyon. "Don't move," he called out, his voice deep and steady. "Stay absolutely still." The woman's head turned toward him, and even from this distance he could see the terror in her eyes. She was young, probably early 20s, with auburn hair that had escaped its pins and whipped around her face. Her dress was covered in dust from travel, and he could see her knuckles were white from gripping the rope. "The bridge is collapsing," she cried out, her voice trembling. "I tried to cross, and it just started falling apart beneath me." Nathan moved to the edge and tested the nearest plank with his boot. It groaned ominously but held. The whole structure was a death trap, but he couldn't leave her there. Already, he could see the ropes fraying where they rubbed against the rock face of the canyon wall. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice calm as he began to edge out onto the bridge. "Florence," she managed. "Florence Gardner. Please, I cannot hold on much longer." "Florence, I'm Nathan Thornhill. I'm going to come get you, but you have to stay exactly where you are. Don't try to move toward me or back to your wagon." "Understand," she nodded, tears streaming down her face. Nathan could see she was shaking, whether from fear or exhaustion he couldn't tell, probably both. He moved out onto the bridge, distributing his weight carefully, feeling each plank before putting his full weight on it. The structure swayed and groaned, and he heard Florence gasp. "It's all right," he said, though his mind was racing through possibilities. The bridge wouldn't support them both trying to walk back. It was barely supporting them now. "Just keep looking at me, Florence. Don't look down." He made it to within 5 feet of her when the plank under his right foot cracked. In an instant, Nathan grabbed the rope railing and swung his weight to the next plank. The broken board fell away, tumbling down to the river below where it was instantly swept away by the current. Florence screamed again. "Easy now," Nathan said, his heart pounding but his voice remaining steady. "That was just one plank. We're fine." He closed the distance between them, and now he could see her clearly. She was beautiful despite the terror and exhaustion etched on her face, with green eyes that reminded him of the aspen leaves in summer and a smattering of freckles across her nose. She smelled of lavender and sage, an odd combination that somehow suited her. "I'm going to pick you up now," he said, reaching for her. "You need to let go of the rope and put your arms around my neck. Can you do that?" "I can't," she whispered. "My hands, they won't move. I've been holding on so long." Nathan didn't hesitate. He wrapped one powerful arm around her waist and pulled her against him, then used his other hand to pry her fingers off the rope one by one. She whimpered but didn't fight him, and finally she was free, her arms going around his neck in a death grip as she buried her face against his chest. "Hold tight," he murmured against her hair, and then he started back. Carrying her changed everything. The bridge swayed more violently with the additional weight in his arms, and he had to move faster than he wanted. Each step was a calculated risk, and he could feel Florence trembling against him, could feel her breath rapid and hot against his neck through his shirt. His muscles burned with the effort of carrying her and maintaining balance, but Nathan had carried full-grown bucks over rougher terrain. He could do this. The bridge groaned one final warning before the far supports gave way completely. Nathan heard the crack and ran the last 10 feet, his boots pounding on planks that splintered beneath him. He leaped the final gap to solid ground just as the entire structure collapsed behind them, the crash of wood and rope hitting water echoing up from the gorge. They landed hard, Nathan twisting to take the impact on his shoulder while keeping Florence protected against his chest. They rolled twice before coming to a stop in the dust of the mining trail, both of them breathing hard. For a long moment neither moved, then Florence lifted her head to look back at where the bridge had been. There was nothing left but frayed rope ends dangling from the supports on their side of the gorge. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh my God, we would have died." Nathan sat up slowly, keeping one arm around her until he was sure she was steady. "But we didn't. You're safe now." Florence turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time, and he saw the fear in her eyes gradually give way to something else. Wonder, maybe, or disbelief. Her hand came up to touch his face, as if she needed to confirm he was real. "You saved my life," she said softly. "You risked your own life to save mine." Nathan felt suddenly self-conscious under her gaze, aware of how he must look, wild and rough from weeks in the mountains. "Couldn't very well leave you there to fall." "Most men would have," she said, and there was a weight of experience behind those words that made him wonder what her story was. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Now that the immediate danger had passed, he could see she was in rough shape. Her dress was torn in several places, her hands were scraped raw from gripping the rope, and she looked like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips cracked from sun and wind. "Your wagon," Nathan said, looking across the gorge to where it sat with its broken wheel. "How long have you been out here?" "Since yesterday morning," Florence admitted. "The wheel broke on a rock about a mile back. I was trying to lead the horse across to find help, thought maybe I could come back with someone to fix it. But the bridge started falling apart the moment I stepped on it." She looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Where did you come from?" "I haven't seen another soul for 2 days. I live up in the high country," Nathan said, gesturing vaguely toward the mountains. "I was tracking a cat. What are you doing out here alone? This trail hasn't been used regularly since the mines played out 3 years ago." Florence wrapped her arms around herself, and Nathan noticed her shiver despite the heat. Shock, probably. He moved to his horse and pulled out his spare shirt, bringing it back to drape around her shoulders. It dwarfed her, hanging nearly to her knees, but she pulled it tight around herself gratefully. "I was trying to get to Sakaro," she said. I had a map that showed this as a shortcut from the main road. I should have known better than to trust a map drawn by a man trying to sell me supplies. Sakaro was a good 30 miles south and west, down out of the mountains and into the river valley. Nathan frowned. You came from the north, from Santa Fe, from further than that, Florence said, and something in her voice made it clear she didn't want to elaborate. I need to get to Sakaro. I have an aunt there, she's expecting me. She looked at the gorge separating them from her wagon, from whatever supplies she had. Though I suppose now I have nothing. Everything I own is in that wagon. Nathan studied her for a moment, taking in the quality of her dress despite its worn condition, the cultured way she spoke, the absence of a wedding ring on her finger. A woman alone in the New Mexico Territory wilderness, fleeing from something, heading toward family. None of his business, really, except that she was now stranded here with no supplies, no way across the gorge and no means of getting where she needed to go. I can get your things, he said finally, and I can get you to Sakaro, but not today. It's already afternoon and we're a hard ride from anywhere. I've got a cabin about 5 miles north where we can spend the night, and tomorrow we can figure out how to retrieve your wagon. Florence looked uncertain. I couldn't impose on you any further. You've already saved my life. What's your other option? Nathan asked bluntly. You planning to walk to Sakaro with no food, no water, and no supplies? You'd be dead before sunset tomorrow if the animals or exposure didn't get you tonight. She flinched at his harsh words, but he saw acceptance in her eyes. She knew he was right. I have a little money, I can pay you for your trouble. I don't want your money, Nathan said, more roughly than he intended. He softened his tone. Come on. My cabin isn't much, but it's safe and dry and I've got food. You need to eat something and rest. Tomorrow we'll work out the rest. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Florence stiffened at first, clearly uncomfortable with the intimacy of sitting so close to a strange man, but as they started moving, she gradually relaxed back against his chest. Nathan found himself very aware of her presence, the way she fit against him, the smell of her hair even dusty and disheveled. It had been a long time since he'd been this close to a woman by choice. After what happened in Denver, he'd retreated to these mountains specifically to avoid this kind of complication. The ride to his cabin took them higher into the mountains, following game trails that Florence would never have found on her own. The terrain grew rockier, the trees denser, and the air noticeably cooler as they climbed. Nathan felt Florence shiver again and wrapped one arm more securely around her waist, sharing his warmth. Why do you live all the way up here? She asked after a while, her voice quiet. It seems so isolated. That's the point, Nathan said. When she didn't respond, clearly waiting for more, he added, I like the solitude. No people, no complications, just me and the mountains. That sounds lonely. Lonely is different from alone, Nathan said. Alone is a choice. Florence was quiet for a moment, then said softly, Yes. Yes, I suppose it is. They rode in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled with empty words. Nathan found himself studying the back of Florence's head, the way the afternoon sun caught red highlights in her auburn hair, the determined set of her shoulders despite everything she'd been through. She had strength in her, he could sense it. The kind of strength that wasn't loud or obvious, but ran deep and true like an underground river. The cabin appeared suddenly, tucked into a clearing surrounded by tall pines with a small creek running behind it. It was solidly built from logs Nathan had cut himself, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Not fancy by any means, but weatherproof and secure. A small barn stood to one side, and there was a smokehouse and a root cellar dug into the hillside. You built this yourself. Florence asked as Nathan helped her down from the horse. "Every bit of it," he confirmed, leading his horse to the barn. "Took me the better part of a year, working between hunting and trapping, but it's home." Florence followed him to the barn, watching as he unsaddled his horse with efficient movements and rubbed the animal down. She stayed quiet, but he could feel her eyes on him, studying him the way he'd studied her earlier. When he'd finished with the horse and made sure it had feed and water, he turned to find her leaning against the barn door, exhaustion clear in every line of her body. "Come on," he said gently, taking her elbow to steady her. "Let's get you inside and fed." The cabin's interior was sparse but clean, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a counter for preparing food, and a bed in the corner. Florence's eyes went to the bed and then away quickly, color rising in her cheeks. "You take the bed tonight," Nathan said, moving to the fireplace to start building a fire. "I'll sleep on the floor. I've done it plenty of times, doesn't bother me none." "I couldn't take your bed," Florence protested. "You can and you will," Nathan said firmly. "No sense arguing about it. You're dead on your feet and those hands need tending." He gestured to a chair. "Sit down and let me look at them." Florence sank into the chair gratefully, holding out her hands. In the better light of the cabin, Nathan could see the rope burns were worse than he'd thought, with raw patches that would need cleaning and bandaging. He fetched water from the bucket by the door and a clean cloth, then knelt in front of her and began gently cleaning the wounds. "This might hurt," he warned. "It already hurts," Florence said, but she didn't pull away as he worked. She studied his face while he tended her hands, and Nathan tried not to be too aware of her scrutiny. "You're very kind," she said softly, "for a man who claims to prefer solitude." "Being solitary doesn't mean being cruel," Nathan said, wrapping her hands carefully with strips of clean cloth. "There, that should help them heal." "Thank you," Florence said, "for everything. The bridge bringing me here, tending to me. I don't think I've properly expressed how grateful I am." Nathan stood abruptly, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I'm going to see about getting us some dinner. You just rest." He busied himself with preparing food, pulling out supplies from his stores, dried venison, beans, some potatoes from his root cellar, coffee. Not fancy, but it would be hot and filling. While he cooked, Florence sat at the table watching him, and gradually she started asking questions. Where had he learned to track? How long had he been in New Mexico? Did he ever go into town? Nathan found himself answering despite his usual reticence. There was something about Florence that made talking easy, maybe the genuine interest in her eyes, or the way she really listened when he spoke. He told her about growing up in Colorado, about learning to track from an old trapper who'd taken him under his wing when Nathan's parents died of fever when he was 16. About drifting south into New Mexico territory 5 years ago and finding these mountains that felt like home in a way nowhere else ever had. "What about you?" he asked as he set bowls of stew in front of them. "What brings you to New Mexico territory, running from whatever you're running from?" Florence stiffened, and Nathan thought she might refuse to answer. But after a long moment she said quietly, "My husband died 6 months ago, in Chicago. There were debts, a lot of them, that I didn't know about. Men came looking for payment, and when I couldn't give it, they suggested other ways I might work off what was owed." Her voice went flat. "I left that same night with what I could carry and started heading west. I have an aunt in Socorro, my mother's sister. She's the only family I have left." Nathan felt anger kindle in his chest at the thought of men threatening this woman, but he kept his voice neutral. "Your husband, you mourn him." Florence's laugh was bitter. "I barely knew him. It was an arranged marriage made by my father before he died. I thought it would be security, stability. I didn't realize Charles was a gambler who couldn't control himself. He was kind enough to me in his way, but he left me with nothing but debts and dangerous men at my door." She looked up at Nathan. "So yes, I'm running. And I'll keep running until I reach Sakura and my aunt's protection." "You're safe here," Nathan said firmly. "Those men, they're not going to find you up in these mountains." "How can you be sure?" "Because these mountains are mine," Nathan said with quiet confidence. "I know every trail, every pass, every hiding place. If someone came up here looking for you, I'd know about it long before they got anywhere near this cabin." He held her gaze. "You're safe, Florence. I give you my word." Florence blinked rapidly, and Nathan realized she was fighting back tears. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." "Maybe that's exactly why," Nathan said. "No expectations, no history, no complications. Just one person helping another because it's the right thing to do." They finished their meal in silence, but it was thoughtful rather than uncomfortable. After, Nathan heated water and offered Florence the chance to wash, turning his back to give her privacy while she cleaned up as best she could. When she was done, he banked the fire and laid out blankets on the floor for himself. "Good night, Florence," he said as she climbed into his bed, still wearing her dress though she'd removed her boots. "Good night, Nathan," she replied softly, "and thank you for everything." Nathan lay awake long after Florence's breathing had evened out into sleep, staring at the ceiling beams he'd hewn and fitted himself. He was intensely aware of her presence in his space, this woman who had literally fallen into his life. It had been 3 years since he'd last been with a woman, since Margaret in Denver had proven to him that trusting someone with your heart only led to betrayal and pain. He'd been working as a guide for rich Eastern men who wanted to hunt in the Rockies, and Margaret had been a saloon singer who'd seemed different from the other women in town. For 6 months, he'd courted her, thinking they might have a future together. Then he discovered she was also being courted by 2 other men, playing all 3 of them against each other, seeing who would offer her the best deal for marriage. When Nathan had confronted her, she'd laughed at him, called him a fool for thinking a woman like her would actually want to live in the wilderness with a rough mountain man when she could have a merchant's comfortable life in town. So he'd left Denver and headed south, into New Mexico territory, and built himself a life that didn't depend on anyone else. A life where no one could hurt him because he didn't let anyone close enough to matter. But now here was Florence Gardner, sleeping in his bed, trusting him completely despite having just met him. And Nathan found himself wanting to be worthy of that trust in a way that terrified him. Morning came cold and clear, with frost on the grass outside the cabin. Nathan woke to find Florence already up, trying to figure out how to make coffee with her bandaged hands. He took over wordlessly, stoking the fire and setting the coffee pot to boil while she sat at the table watching him. "I've been thinking," Florence said, "about my wagon. Even if we could get to it, I cannot cross that gorge, and I need what's in it, not just my belongings but the money I have hidden there. It's all I have to start over with in Sakura." Nathan poured coffee for both of them and sat down across from her. "The gorge is about 40 feet across where the bridge was. I could rig a rope system, use my horse to pull your wagon across. But that's not the real problem." "What is?" "That bridge needs to be rebuilt," Nathan said. "Not just for you, but for anyone else who might come through here. The mining trail isn't used much anymore, but it's still the fastest route from the northern settlements to Sakura. Someone else could end up stranded there like you were, or worse, try to cross without realizing how unstable it was and fall." Florence looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see right into him. "You're thinking of building a new bridge yourself?" "I am," Nathan confirmed. "I've got the materials up at an old lumber camp about 2 miles from here, cut and seasoned timber left over from when they were building mine supports. And I've built bridges before, smaller ones on my property. It would take time, maybe a week or two of hard work, but I could do it." "Why would you do that?" Florence asked. "You live up here specifically to avoid people. Why would you build a bridge to make it easier for them to come through?" Nathan considered his answer carefully. "Because some things are bigger than just what we want for ourselves. That trail is important. And because I can't stomach the thought of someone else ending up in the situation you were in yesterday." He paused. "And because you need to get your things and get to Sakura, and this is the best way to make that happen safely." 2 weeks, Florence said quietly. "You would spend 2 weeks building a bridge for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Nathan said. "And I've got no pressing business elsewhere. My winter supplies are already laid in, my cabin is secure, I can spare the time." Florence set down her coffee cup and reached across the table to lay her bandaged hand over his. "Then let me help. I cannot do heavy labor with my hands like this, but I can cook for you, tend to your animals, do whatever else needs doing around here. It's the least I can do." Nathan should have said no, should have kept her at a distance, maintained the walls he'd built so carefully over the last 3 years. But looking into her eyes, seeing the determination there mixed with vulnerability, he found himself nodding. "All right, we'll do it together." They spent that day preparing. Nathan rode to the old lumber camp and assessed what materials were usable, making mental calculations about what he'd need. Florence, despite her injured hands, insisted on cleaning the cabin properly and preparing a good meal. When Nathan returned at dusk, he found the cabin transformed, cleaner than it had been since he'd built it, with the smell of baking bread filling the air. "How did you manage this?" he asked, looking around in amazement. Florence smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, making her not just pretty but genuinely beautiful. "I'm stubborn, and I couldn't just sit around doing nothing while you're planning to work yourself to exhaustion building a bridge." Over dinner, they talked more easily than the night before. Florence told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her mother who died when she was young and her father who'd been a banker, about her arranged marriage at 20 to Charles Gardner, a man 20 years her senior who'd seemed respectable but turned out to be anything but, about the terror of fleeing Chicago in the middle of the night, traveling by train and stage and wagon, always looking over her shoulder. Nathan found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. About his parents, his mother who'd loved books and taught him to read despite their rough frontier life, his father who'd been a blacksmith with dreams of striking it rich mining. About their deaths from fever when Nathan was just 16, leaving him alone in the world. About Margaret and the betrayal that had driven him into these mountains. "She was a fool," Florence said quietly when he finished, "to have your loyalty and trust and throw it away for money." "Maybe she just knew what she wanted," Nathan said. "Can't fault someone for being honest about that." "There's a difference between knowing what you want and being cruel about it," Florence said firmly. "She was cruel, Nathan. You deserved better." Something in Nathan's chest loosened at those words, a knot he hadn't realized was still there. "Maybe, but it taught me not to trust easy." "Yet here you are, letting a strange woman stay in your home, planning to spend 2 weeks of hard labor to help her," Florence pointed out. "Maybe you trust easier than you think." Nathan didn't have an answer for that. The next morning they rode out together to survey the bridge site properly. Nathan left Florence on the safe side while he carefully picked his way down the canyon wall to examine the supports and the gorge itself. The river was lower now than it had been in spring, but still running fast and dangerous. He'd need to anchor the new bridge more securely than the old one had been, drill into the rock face itself, rather than relying on the weathered wooden posts that had failed. Florence watched from above, And when he climbed back up, she had suggestions that surprised him with their practicality. Her father might have been a banker, but clearly he'd taught his daughter to think logically about structures and engineering. "You should angle the supports," she said, sketching in the dust with a stick. "See, like this. It distributes the weight better and makes it more stable in high winds." Nathan looked at her sketch and then at her. "Your father taught you this. He wanted a son to follow him into business," Florence said with a slight smile. "He got me instead, but he taught me anyway. I helped him review loan applications for construction projects." "You learn a lot about how things are built when you're evaluating whether to risk money on them." "Huh," Nathan said, impressed. "Well then, Miss Gardner, what do you think about using a double rope suspension system instead of trying to make it entirely rigid?" They spent the rest of the morning planning, and Nathan found himself enjoying it more than he'd expected. Florence's mind was sharp, and she asked questions that made him think through his approach more carefully. By the time they headed back to the cabin, they had a solid plan that Nathan felt confident about. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Nathan would spend the days hauling timber from the lumber camp, preparing materials, and beginning the hard work of setting anchors in the rock face. Florence tended the cabin, cooked meals that were far better than Nathan's usual fare, and in the afternoons would ride out to the bridge site with supplies and fresh water. Her hands were healing quickly, and soon she was helping with lighter tasks, holding tools, organizing materials, even learning to splice rope under Nathan's patient instruction. They talked constantly, about everything and nothing. Florence told stories about Philadelphia high society that made Nathan laugh with their absurdity. Nathan taught her about reading animal tracks and understanding weather signs. She asked about his life in the mountains, genuinely curious about how he survived alone through harsh winters and what he did with his time. He found himself telling her things he'd never articulated before, about the peace he found in solitude, the satisfaction of living by his own hands, the beauty of watching seasons change in the high country. And gradually, without either of them quite realizing when it started, the nature of their relationship began to shift. Nathan found himself watching for Florence's smile, listening for her laugh. He noticed small things, like the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, or how she hummed while she cooked. The cabin that had always felt adequately spacious suddenly seemed intimate with two people in it, and Nathan was hyper-aware of her presence, especially in the evenings when they sat by the fireplace, talking long after dark. Florence, for her part, seemed equally aware of him. He'd catch her watching him sometimes, her green eyes thoughtful, and she'd look away quickly when their gazes met. She started leaving small touches, a hand on his arm when he handed her something, her shoulder brushing his when they worked side by side. Nothing improper, but each contact sent a jolt through Nathan that he couldn't ignore. One afternoon, about a week into the bridge project, they were working at the site together. Nathan was shirtless in the heat, his muscular torso gleaming with sweat as he worked to secure one of the main support beams. Florence was supposed to be feeding rope to him, but when he looked down, he found her staring at him, her face flushed and her eyes wide. "Florence," he called down. She startled, then quickly began feeding the rope, but Nathan didn't miss the way her hands trembled slightly. He finished securing the beam and climbed back up to find her studiously not looking at him. "You all right?" he asked, pulling his shirt back on. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just the heat." Nathan looked at the autumn sky, the temperature barely above 60 degrees. "Right. The heat." Florence shot him a look, then laughed despite herself. "I'm being ridiculous. Didn't say that. You didn't have to." She sat down on a rock, looking out over the gorge. This is going to sound strange, but I feel more alive here, in the middle of nowhere with a broken bridge and uncertain future, than I have in years. Maybe ever. Nathan sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Doesn't sound strange to me. There's something about this country that strips everything down to what matters. No pretense, no society rules, just surviving and living. Is that why you stay? Part of it, Nathan admitted. Also because I'm not very good at pretense and society rules, never have been. Florence smiled. I like that about you. You say what you mean. You do what you say you'll do. It's refreshing after spending so much time around men who said pretty words but meant none of them. Your husband, among others, Florence said. My husband, my father's business associates, the men who came collecting his debts. They all talked in circles, made promises they had no intention of keeping. You're different. When you said you'd build this bridge, you meant it. When you said I was safe, you meant that too. Nathan felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening that he'd kept firmly locked. I always mean what I say to you, Florence. She turned to look at him, and the expression in her eyes made Nathan's breath catch. I know, she said softly. That's why I trust you. They sat there for a long moment, the world narrowing down to just the two of them and the wind whistling through the gorge. Nathan found himself leaning closer, drawn by something he couldn't name and wasn't sure he wanted to resist. Florence's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. The moment broke when Nathan's horse nickered and they both jumped apart. Nathan cleared his throat. We should get back to work. Want to get the second support set before dark. Yes, Florence agreed, but her voice was breathless. Yes, we should do that. They worked the rest of the afternoon in charged silence, both hyper-aware of the other. Nathan tried to focus on the bridge, on the physical labor that usually cleared his mind, but he kept finding his thoughts drifting to Florence. To the way she smiled when she figured something out, the sound of her laugh, the trust in her eyes when she looked at him. This was dangerous territory. He'd sworn off women, off relationships, off anything that could lead to the kind of hurt he'd felt with Margaret. But Florence wasn't Margaret. That truth was becoming clearer every day. Where Margaret had been calculating and cold beneath her charm, Florence was genuine. Where Margaret had wanted to change him, to make him into something civilized and proper, Florence seemed to appreciate him exactly as he was. That night at dinner, Florence was quieter than usual. Nathan watched her push food around her plate, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Something on your mind? He asked finally. Florence looked up at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. I've been thinking about Sakura. About leaving here and continuing on to my aunt's house. Nathan's heart sank, though he tried not to show it. Bridge should be done in another week. Then we can get your wagon across and you can be on your way. That's not what I mean, Florence said. She set down her fork and looked at him directly. I've been thinking that maybe I don't want to leave. Nathan went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying that I feel more at home in your cabin after 10 days than I ever did in any of the fancy houses I've lived in, Florence said, the words coming faster now like she needed to get them out before she lost her nerve. I'm saying that I enjoy your company more than anyone I've ever known. I'm saying that the thought of leaving here, of leaving you, makes me feel like I'm about to lose something precious. Florence, Nathan said, his voice rough. I know it's improper, she continued. I know I've only known you a short time, and that I'm probably breaking a dozen social rules even saying this. But out here, those rules don't seem to matter. What matters is that I feel safe with you, and happy, and like I can be myself without pretense or fear. And I hope that maybe you feel something similar. Nathan stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace, his mind racing. Everything in him wanted to reach for what she was offering, but fear held him back. You don't know what you're asking. Don't I? Florence stood too, moving toward him. Nathan, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any promises you're not ready for. I'm just asking if maybe, possibly, you might want me to stay, to see what this could be between us. Nathan turned to face her, and the hope mixed with fear in her eyes was his undoing. You deserve better than a rough mountain man living alone in the wilderness. Maybe I get to decide what I deserve, Florence said firmly. And maybe what I deserve is someone honest and kind and strong who sees me for who I am and likes me anyway. Someone who risks his life to save strangers on broken bridges and spends weeks building a new one just because it's the right thing to do. I hurt once before, Nathan said quietly. Trusted someone and had it thrown back in my face. I don't know if I can do that again. Florence stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. I'm not her, Nathan. I'm not whoever hurt you. I'm just me, Florence Gardner from Philadelphia, who's running from her old life and hoping to build a new one. And I'd like to build it here with you if you'll have me. Nathan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth in every line of her face. She meant it, all of it. And suddenly, the fear seemed less important than the possibility of what they could have together. I'd like that, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. More than I can say, I'd like that. Florence's smile was radiant. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, and Nathan held her close, feeling the tension he'd been carrying for days, maybe years, finally start to ease. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucked under his chin, her warmth seeping into him. We'll take it slow, he murmured against her hair. Figure things out as we go. That sounds perfect, Florence said. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, while the fire crackled and the wind whispered outside. When they finally pulled apart, Nathan cupped Florence's face in his hands and kissed her forehead gently, a promise of more to come but not rushing anything. The next week passed in a blur of hard work and growing closeness. They finished the bridge together, Nathan doing the heavy labor while Florence helped with the detailed work. She proved to be a quick learner, and Nathan found himself teaching her skills he'd never imagined sharing with anyone. How to judge the strength of wood, how to tie knots that would hold under stress, how to test supports for soundness. The new bridge was a thing of beauty when it was complete, solid and strong with double rope supports and angled beams just as Florence had suggested. Nathan tested it carefully, walking across and back multiple times, jumping on the planks to test for any give. It held perfectly, sturdy enough to last for decades if properly maintained. It's beautiful, Florence said, standing beside him as they surveyed their work. You should be proud. We should be proud, Nathan corrected. Couldn't have done it without you. They crossed together to retrieve Florence's wagon, Nathan rigging the rope system he'd planned to pull it across the gorge. It was delicate work, but with Florence helping to guide the wagon from the far side before crossing back on the new bridge, they managed to get everything safely across. Florence's belongings were few but precious to her, and Nathan helped her sort through what she wanted to keep at the cabin versus what she might store or sell. Among her things was a small wooden box that she opened carefully, revealing a collection of letters tied with ribbon and a daguerreotype of a young woman who looked like Florence. My mother, Florence explained, seeing Nathan's curious look. She died when I was 8. These are letters she wrote to my aunt, her sister, over the years. They're all I have left of her. Then they're precious indeed, Nathan said. We'll keep them safe. We, Florence repeated softly, smiling. I like the sound of that. As the days grew shorter and colder, signaling winter's approach, Nathan and Florence settled into life together. It wasn't always smooth. They were two people used to being alone, learning to share space and make decisions together. Florence had to adjust to the harsh realities of mountain life. The cold, the isolation, the constant work required to survive. Nathan had to learn to consider someone else's needs and wants, to communicate instead of just doing things his own way. But they worked at it, both committed to making their unlikely partnership succeed. Florence learned to hunt and trap, to read weather signs and animal behavior. Nathan learned to appreciate the small comforts she brought to the cabin, the wildflowers she'd bring in to brighten the table, the way she'd read aloud in the evenings from the few books she owned. One evening in late October, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Florence was tucked against Nathan's side, wrapped in one of his heavy jackets against the cold. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going to Sakura?" Florence tilted her head to look up at him. "Never, not even once. Do you regret letting me stay?" "Never," Nathan echoed. He kissed her then properly, deeply, in a way they'd been building toward for weeks. Florence responded with equal passion, her arms coming up around his neck, and Nathan felt the last of his walls crumble completely. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Florence rested her forehead against his. "I love you, Nathan Thornhill. I think I have since you carried me off that broken bridge, but I know it now for certain." "I love you too," Nathan said, the words feeling both strange and right. "Florence Gardner, you're the bravest, strongest, most stubborn woman I've ever met, and I don't want to spend another day without you." "Good," Florence said, smiling, "because I'm not going anywhere." Winter came to the mountains with a vengeance that year, bringing snow that piled high and winds that howled through the pines. But the cabin was warm and secure, and Nathan and Florence weathered it together. They spent long evenings talking, planning, dreaming about the future. Florence suggested they could expand the cabin in spring, maybe add another room. Nathan talked about teaching her to track come summer, taking her into the high country he loved so much. They were married in December by a circuit preacher who happened through Sakura when they made a supply run. It was a simple ceremony in the small church, with Florence's Aunt Martha as witness. Martha Gardner had been initially skeptical about her niece marrying a mountain man she'd known for only a few months, but meeting Nathan had won her over. She saw how he looked at Florence, like she was something precious and irreplaceable, and she saw how happy Florence was, truly happy in a way she'd never been in her life before. "You take care of my girl," Martha said to Nathan after the ceremony, gripping his hand hard. "With my life," Nathan promised, meaning every word. They returned to the cabin as husband and wife, and that night they truly became one in every sense. Nathan was gentle with Florence, patient and careful, and she gave herself to him with complete trust. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed, Florence traced patterns on Nathan's chest. "I never knew it could be like this," she said softly. "Charles, he never made me feel anything, but you, Nathan, you make me feel everything." Nathan tightened his arms around her. "You're everything to me, Florence. I'd given up on feeling this way about anyone, but you changed all that." "We saved each other," Florence said. "You saved me from that bridge and I saved you from loneliness." "That's about right," Nathan agreed. Spring came eventually, as it always did, bringing melt-off and green growth and the return of game to the high country. True to their winter plans, Nathan began expanding the cabin, adding a second room that would eventually serve as a bedroom so the main room could be dedicated to living space. Florence planted a garden, determined to grow vegetables and herbs to supplement their diet. They also began maintaining the bridge, checking it regularly to make sure it remained sound. Word spread among the scattered settlements about the new bridge, and they started seeing more travelers on the old mining road. Nathan and Florence would offer water and directions to anyone who passed, and their hospitality became known throughout the region. In June, Florence realized she was pregnant. She told Nathan one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction. They'd never specifically discussed children, and she wasn't sure if he wanted to be a father. Nathan's response was to pick her up and spin her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby, we're having a baby. In January, I think," Florence said, smiling at his enthusiasm. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Nathan said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "A child, our child." "Florence, this is everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Nathan was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He wouldn't let Florence do any heavy work and fretted constantly about her health. Florence found it both endearing and exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying water from the creek. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time, Nathan. I'm not going to break." "Humor me," Nathan said, taking the bucket from her anyway. "I've never done this before, and I'm terrified of something going wrong." Florence softened, touching his face gently. "Nothing is going to go wrong. We're healthy. We have everything we need, and when the time comes, your hands are skilled enough to help bring our baby into the world if we can't get to town." As it happened, they did make it to Socorro when Florence's time came in late January. Nathan had been keeping a careful eye on her, and at the first signs of labor he bundled her onto their horse, now a gentle mare he'd acquired specifically for her, and they made the careful ride down to town. Florence's Aunt Martha and the local midwife were waiting, and after 12 hours of labor, Florence delivered a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's strong features. Nathan held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, this mountain man who'd thought he'd never have a family overcome with emotion. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Florence, he's absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Florence asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness. They discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything. Now, holding his son, Nathan knew. "Thomas, after my father." "Thomas Thornhill," Florence said, trying it out. "I like it. Hello, Thomas." "Welcome to the world, little one." They stayed in Socorro for 2 weeks while Florence recovered, then made the journey back to their mountain home. Florence worried about raising a baby in such an isolated place, but Nathan pointed out that he'd grown up in similar circumstances and turned out fine. "Besides," he said, "we're not that isolated anymore. We have the bridge now and neighbors within a day's ride. And Thomas will grow up strong and capable, learning to live off the land and appreciate the beauty around him." Florence had to admit he was right. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler to young boy, he thrived in the mountain environment. He was curious and fearless, exploring everything under his parents' watchful eyes. Nathan taught him to track and hunt, to read the forest and understand the animals. Florence taught him to read and write, to do arithmetic and think critically, but they didn't remain alone for long. When Thomas was 2, Florence gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a sweet-tempered child with her mother's red hair and green eyes. 2 years after that came another son, James, who inherited his father's size and his mother's quick mind. The cabin expanded over the years to accommodate the growing family, becoming more of a compound with multiple buildings. Nathan built a proper schoolroom where Florence could teach not just their children, but also the children of the few other families who'd settled in the area, drawn by the safety and community that had grown up around the Thornhill homestead. The bridge became something of a landmark, known throughout New Mexico territory as Thornhill Bridge. Nathan maintained it faithfully, and as his sons grew old enough, they helped him, It became a point of pride, this bridge that had brought their parents together, and the family made sure it remained strong and safe for all who passed. Florence never regretted her decision to stay. Oh, there were hard times, winters when they were snowed in for weeks, summers when drought threatened their water supply, the constant worry about accidents or illness so far from proper medical care. But through it all, she and Nathan stood together, their love deepening with each passing year. 20 years after that day on the broken bridge, Florence stood on the porch of their home, now a substantial ranch house, watching Nathan work with their sons on yet another repair to the bridge. Thomas was 20 now, a young man as tall and strong as his father, preparing to head to Santa Fe to study engineering. Sarah was 18 and engaged to a young rancher from a neighboring valley. James was 16 and already as skilled a tracker as his father had ever been. Florence felt arms slip around her waist from behind and smiled as Nathan's chin came to rest on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am," Florence said, leaning back against him. "How one moment of terror on a broken bridge led to all of this. Our children, our home, our life together." "I'm the lucky one," Nathan said. "I was just existing before you, surviving but not really living. You taught me how to live again, Florence, how to love and trust and hope." Florence turned in his arms to face him. There was silver in his dark hair now, lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as the day she'd first seen him. "We saved each other. You carried me across that broken bridge, and then you built a new one. But really, you built a bridge for me from my old life to my new one, from loneliness to love." Nathan kissed her, deep and sweet, and Florence melted into it as she always did. After 20 years, his kisses still made her heart race. "I love you, Florence Thornhill," Nathan murmured against her lips. "I love you too," Florence replied. "Always and forever." Their children called up from the bridge, some question about the repair work, and Nathan sighed dramatically. "Duty calls. But tonight, just you and me, all right? We'll sit on the porch and watch the stars like we used to." "It's a date," Florence said, smiling. She watched him stride down to the bridge, still moving with the confidence and strength that had first caught her attention all those years ago. Their children gathered around him, listening intently as he explained something about the bridge's construction. This was their legacy, Florence thought. Not just the bridge itself, but the love and dedication it represented. The willingness to put in hard work for something that mattered, to build something strong and lasting that would serve not just themselves but everyone who came after. That evening, true to his word, Nathan and Florence sat together on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. The air was cool with early autumn, reminding Florence of that first autumn they'd spent together, learning to love and trust each other. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Florence asked, tucked against Nathan's side exactly as she'd been all those years ago. "Every detail," Nathan said. "You were wearing my jacket because you were cold. I was terrified of what I was feeling for you. You asked if I ever regretted living up here alone. And now you're not alone anymore," Florence said. "Best decision I ever made," Nathan said. "Carrying you off that bridge, building a new one, asking you to stay. All of it. Best decisions of my life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Down the hill they could hear their children's voices, Thomas and Sarah arguing good-naturedly about something while James laughed at both of them. The sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived. "Nathan," Florence said after a while, thank you for everything. For saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me." Nathan pulled her closer. "Thank you for being brave enough to stay, for trusting a rough mountain man you barely knew, for making this cabin into a home. Always, Florence whispered. As the years continued to pass, Nathan and Florence's love story became something of a legend in the territory. People spoke of the mountain man who'd risked his life to save a stranger on a broken bridge, then built a new one strong enough to last generations. They spoke of the refined Philadelphia lady who'd given up society life to live in the wilderness with the man she loved. Most of all, they spoke of a love that weathered every hardship and only grew stronger with time. Thomas did go to Santa Fe to study engineering, and he eventually returned to the mountains to build bridges and roads throughout the territory, his work inspired by his father's dedication and skill. Sarah married her rancher and raised 5 children of her own on the neighboring property, staying close to her parents. James became a guide like his father had been, leading hunting and exploring parties into the high country while always returning home to the mountains he loved. Nathan and Florence grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies less steady than they'd once been, but their love as strong as ever. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, a feast held at the ranch house that lasted 2 days. 50 years, Florence marveled as they sat together after most of the guests had departed. Can you believe it? Not really, Nathan admitted. Feels like yesterday I was carrying you across that broken bridge, terrified I'd drop you. You never would have, Florence said with certainty. Even then, I knew I could trust you completely. Nathan took her hand, his grip still strong despite his years. And I knew, even then, that you were going to change my life. I just didn't realize how much or how grateful I'd be for it. They made the walk down to the bridge together, moving slowly but steadily. The bridge had been reinforced and repaired many times over the years, but the core structure was still the one Nathan had built with Florence's help all those decades ago. They stood in the center, looking down at the water rushing below. You remember what you said to me that day? Nathan asked. When I first reached you on the old bridge, Florence thought back. I said I couldn't hold on much longer. And I said I was going to come get you, that you just had to stay where you were, Nathan recalled. I think maybe that was about more than just the bridge. You were holding on to life by your fingernails, Florence, running from a past that was trying to destroy you. And I was stuck in one place, refusing to move forward because I was afraid of being hurt again. We saved each other, Florence said, as she had so many times over the years. You gave me somewhere safe to land, and I gave you a reason to stop running from connection. Best trade I ever made, Nathan said, pulling her close. They stood there for a long time, remembering, reflecting on the life they'd built together. Eventually, they made their way back to the house, where their children and grandchildren were still celebrating, filling the home with laughter and love. Nathan and Florence Thornhill lived into their 80s, a remarkable age for the time and place. They remained in their mountain home until the very end, refusing to be moved to town or to live with their children despite offers. This was their place, they said, where they'd found each other and built their life together. This was where they belonged. When Nathan finally passed in his sleep one winter night, Florence held his hand and whispered that she'd see him soon. She followed him 3 days later, dying peacefully in the bed they'd shared for more than 50 years. Their children buried them together on a hill overlooking the bridge with a simple marker that read, Nathan and Florence Thornhill. He carried her across and built a new bridge strong. They built a life even stronger. The bridge stands still, maintained now by great-great-grandchildren who have inherited not just their ancestors' skill, but their dedication to service and community. Travelers still cross it, most not knowing the love story that gave it birth, but some do. Some stop in the middle and look around, trying to imagine what it must have been like that day when a mountain man saved a stranded woman, and both their lives changed forever. The Thornhill ranch house still stands too, now home to James's descendants who carry on the tradition of mountain living their grandfather pioneered. Inside, carefully preserved, are Florence's mother's letters, Nathan's hunting gear, and dozens of other mementos of a life well lived and a love that conquered everything thrown at it. But perhaps the greatest legacy isn't the bridge or the ranch, or even the numerous descendants scattered throughout the West. Perhaps it's the story itself, the proof that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that two broken people can heal each other, and that something as simple as carrying someone across a broken bridge can change the course of entire lives. Nathan had thought he wanted solitude, and Florence had thought she wanted safety. What they both found was something far more valuable: each other. In doing so, they proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust again after being hurt, love again after loss, and build something new and strong from the broken pieces of your past. Their great-granddaughter, also named Florence, now tells the story to her own children on the porch of that same ranch house, looking out toward the bridge her great-grandfather built. She tells them about bravery and love, about hard work and dedication, about building things that last. Remember, she tells them, your great-great-grandfather could have just helped her across and gone on his way. But he didn't. He stayed, he built, he loved. And because he did, all of us are here today. That's what love does. It doesn't just save one person, it creates entire futures. The children listen, wide-eyed, already learning the lessons their ancestors embodied. To be brave, to be kind, to build things strong, to love deeply and completely, to never give up on connection even when it's scary. As the sun sets over the New Mexico mountains, painting them in shades of gold and purple just as it did over 70 years ago, Florence, the great-granddaughter, thinks about the story she's just told. She thinks about how one moment, one choice to help a stranger, rippled out through time to create all of this. A family, a legacy, a love story for the ages. The bridge stands strong in the gathering dusk, a testament to one man's skill and dedication, to one woman's trust and courage, and to the love they built together that was even stronger than stone and timber. It stands as a promise that broken things can be mended, that new beginnings are always possible, and that sometimes the greatest adventures come from the most terrifying moments. Nathan carried Florence across that broken bridge on a September afternoon in 1882. He built a new bridge strong enough to last generations. But what he really built was a love story that would inspire his descendants for over a century, proving that the bridges we build between hearts are the strongest structures of all. And so the story ends where it began, with a bridge over a gorge in the New Mexico wilderness. But it's not really an ending at all. It's a continuation, a legacy that lives on in every person who crosses that bridge, in every Thornhill descendant who embodies the values Nathan and Florence held dear, in every couple who finds unexpected love and chooses to nurture it into something beautiful and lasting. The bridge stands strong, the love story endures. And somewhere, perhaps, two souls rest together, satisfied with the legacy they left behind. Proof that love, real love, can overcome anything, and that the strongest foundations are built not just with timber and stone, but with trust, dedication, and hearts brave enough to try again.